I'm here today to do my April wrap-up and my May TBR. So I am a BookTube Prize judge this round. This is round 2 of the BookTube Prize, where we are judging fiction released in the United States in the year 2020. And so several of the books that I read during April are books in that category, and therefore I cannot talk about them here. I'm just going to let you know that I read them, and then eventually there will be a series of vlogs and also a ranking video released about, and I will share my thoughts about those books then. So the 3 books that I read for the BookTube Prize in the month of April were The Death of Vivek Oji by Akawaeke Amezi, Homeland Elegies by Akhtar, and Pew by Catherine Lacey. And so I'll talk more about those in another video. The books that I can talk to you about, I read Tracks by Robyn Davidson. This was for #AussieApril, and I really enjoyed this. It was a wonderfully written memoir about Robyn's time traveling within Western Australia from Alice Springs out to the ocean. And she did this trip with 3 camels, and she encountered a lot of indigenous tribes along the way, and she was doing it because she felt called to do it. And there wasn't really some big hidden deep meaning behind it. It was just something she felt called to do, and it was a wonderful adventure to go on. So I did a dedicated vlog all about Tracks, and so if you're interested in learning more about it and my thoughts on the book, it is linked in the description box down below. And there's also a film that came out in 2012 about it, and it was also really good. So I would recommend both of them. My other read for AussieApril was Finding Eliza, Power and Colonial Storytelling by Larissa Bernt. And I think that this was fantastic. This book dissects a lot of the literature that was written about colonization, and it helps to tie the stories that were told about colonization to the structures that have emerged as being the dominant structures that we are now seeing as discriminatory, racist, and unequitable for everyone in specifically here Australia. But I think that all of these themes can be applied to the United States and Canada as well, because there is a common thread in how colonizers justified their actions. And while the landscape, the geography, and the indigenous peoples who were affected are different in the different places, the outcomes in a lot of cases are the same, in it being that indigenous peoples have been unfairly treated and continue to live with the repercussions of the actions of colonization to this day, as do the people in the dominant population of white settlers who continue to perpetuate and live within that system because because we're not aware of how the system is affecting others. And so very powerful. Larissa Bernt dissects Robinson Crusoe in this book, and it's interesting because as she was talking about Robinson Crusoe, I started to realize that I had read that book at some point in elementary school, I believe, and I think we read it in grade 3 or grade 4, and I thought, I was not in any way able to absorb the big themes within that novel at that time. So it was strange to think about the fact that I was reading this 18th century novel when I was 8 or 9 years old. I do remember reading it, and I don't remember much about the plot, but reading the dissection of it in here and the inherent kind of systemic racist perpetuations that it fed. I just, I don't think I'd ever want to reread it. There were a few other books that were mentioned in here, and other writers that I think I will eventually check out. So I think this is a really powerful book to read, very concise, very well written, and it'll just help you again to kind of get those little subtle things that you don't really realize necessarily when you're immersed in the dominant culture that affect the way other people are viewed and the trajectory of their lives as living dominated by another culture. I also listened to an extra book this month, and that was The Boy in the Striped Pajamas by John Boyne. I ended up deciding to listen to that book because my son is reading it at school. And whenever my kids are reading a book at school that I'm not familiar with, I like to try to read it so that I can talk about it with them and kind of understand or help them understand, or, just experience that with them. So overall, it's quite a novel, a very amazing story. This is a World War II narrative, if you have never heard of it before, and it is the story of Bruno, a young German boy whose father is a member of the Nazi regime who is running a concentration camp in Poland. And you hear the entire story from Bruno's perspective. He's 9 years old, and it's said that it's a fable. And so with that, you're supposed to go into the book believing that this precocious, innocent child does not really understand what's going on around him and is so self-absorbed that he has a challenge emoting. And he ends up meeting a young Jewish boy named Shmuel, who is on the other side of the fence, and they develop a relationship where they talk, and Bruno brings him food, and the ending is quite devastating. I didn't feel overly emotional about the characters because I feel like there is kind of a level of separation, and also I became often quite irritated with Bruno, the young boy. I think precocious children in literature is a whole category, and to me there's a limit to how innocent or how naive or how self-absorbed a child can be. And personally, I have a 10-year-old boy. I've raised two, actually. It was very hard to accept that any child could be so oblivious to the reality of what's going on around them. But I did listen to an interview with John Boyne at the end of the audiobook, and he talked about the fact that there was a lot of ambivalence and there was a lot of people living in Germany who did not know what was really going on, and the same can be said for the Allies. And I totally get that. I totally understand that was true. But I think for me there was just a lack of like a kind of basic level of emotional maturity that the child didn't have. I think a child picks up on pain and fear very easily, and children are very perceptive when something's wrong, and they may not know how to articulate it, but they don't pretend it's not there. So anyway, it was very interesting to read. My son's not quite done the book yet, so I'm very anxious for him to finish so that I can talk about it with him. And the last book that I finished that I can talk about, that I finished in April, was Bring Up the Bodies by Hilary Mantel. Now, I read this because I have to read The Mirror and the Light by Hilary Mantel for the BookTube Prize in May. And I could have just read The Mirror and the Light and skipped it, but I have read Wolf Hall and I wanted to read it anyway, so I decided to read it for April. Overall, I enjoyed it. I think I enjoyed Wolf Hall more, and I think that's because there was more of a sweeping scope to Wolf Hall. It covered more time. It covered from when Thomas Cromwell was like a teenage boy until he becomes, the master secretary with King Henry VIII. And so there was more to get absorbed in, and there was more emotional connection. I didn't find Bring Up the Bodies as much of an emotional connection. It is basically about the downfall of Anne Boleyn, and the rise of Jane Seymour, and I believe it's foreboding the downfall of Thomas Cromwell. And so while I enjoyed it, and I think it was well written, I didn't get as emotionally invested in it as I did with Wolf Hall, and I didn't find the writing as amazing, as compelling as I did with Wolf Hall. So these are not, it's not a series that I adore. It is a series that I appreciate, and I'm happy that I'm reading so far. So yeah, that was the last finish of April. So my May TBR, as I just mentioned, I will be reading The Mirror and the Light by Hilary Mantel, which is almost 900 pages. And oh my, it's big mama. So I think I'm going to be trying to start this really soon so that I don't have to cram it in at the end of because the BookTube Prize judging rankings are due by May 29th. The other two books I will be reading for BookTube Prize are Deacon King Kong by James McBride. I'm listening to that on audio, and Interior Chinatown by Charles Yu, and I'm reading that on ebook. So those will be my last three in my grouping for fiction, BookTube Prize Fiction Group A. Now, on to my other reads for May. I'm going to be joining in with Springathon. If you haven't heard about Springathon, it is a 2-week readathon, so it has already begun, and it is focusing on nature writing. I believe nonfiction nature writing, but I could be wrong. Perhaps fiction is also included in it. And it is hosted by Natalie from Curious Reader and Doris from Maldi Books and Heidi from My Reading Life. I think they're all kind of going in together because of the other book club that Heidi and Doris are doing this year. So for my read for this, I really only had room for one book for Springathon just because of the BookTube Prize reading that I'm doing and the other books that I had already planned to read. So I'm going to read To the River, A Journey Beneath the Surface by Olivia Laing. And I'm really excited to read this. I heard about this years ago. This is Olivia Laing's first book. It's nonfiction. She has a lot of books that are kind of BookTube darlings that a lot of people know about, such as her first novel, which is called Crudo, I believe. But this will be my first book by her. This book also ties in with my Virginia Woolf curiosities because it is the story of the Ouse, I believe that's how you say it, O-U-S-E River in Sussex, in which Virginia Woolf drowned in 1941. And so what Olivia Laing does is she begins and she walks the river. She walks from the source all the way to the sea. And so I'm really intrigued by this, really excited to hear the stories of the river, learn about the history of it, and have that Virginia Woolf connection throughout the narrative as well. So that will be my read for Springathon. And I'm also reading for 2 of my lists that I have, my lists to get through in 2021. And so my 1970s project, I'm going to be reading Half-Breed by Maria Campbell. And this is the powerful life story of a woman whose courage and strength you will never forget. And Maria Campbell was a Métis woman, and this was written in the 1970s. So, you know, I wanted to diversify the writers that I was reading from this project, and not only have one type of voice that I was reading. And so I believe that Maria's voice will be a really important and interesting narrative to add to what I've read so far for the 1970s project. And for my 5-star predictions from the African diaspora, I'm going to be reading Homegoing by Yaa Gyasi. And I'm excited to finally read this. It's been on my TBR for a really long time. I know it is quite a booktube darling as well. And I know that Yaa Gyasi has a new novel out called Transcending Kingdom. And it was in the running in the BookTube Prize, but I believe it was eliminated in the first round. So this is a family saga, 2 sisters based out of Ghana, and I believe one is married to a slave owner or a slave trader, and one of them moves to the United States. I think that's the gist of it. So you kind of see these contrasting generations who come from these 2 women, these 2 sisters. So that is my reading for April and May. Like I said, it's a little bit quicker this month because I can't really talk about 3 of the books that I read, but you will be able to find out all about how I felt about them very soon. And I want to thank you very much for watching, and I will be back again soon with another video.